goals. Goals mean that what are the new initiatives that can be taken, and Azerbaijan government, they have uh, proposed climate action fund. So this climate action fund is a fund where petrochemical states and petrochemical industries, they are asked to voluntarily contribute, and the money would be utilized towards climate vulnerable developing countries, as well as the technological advancement for carbon capture and carbon sequestration. A very controversial proposal. Many they say that it is tried to do greenwashing of dirty money for companies, that the oil and gas companies, they can simply contribute uh, uh, voluntarily towards the fund, and they simply can go away from their responsibilities. But then it can be looked from the other perspective as well, that if there is no money around, definitely every single penny would help. And uh, we still need to see that how best we can get benefit from this. Loss and damage fund, as I told you, is a non-starter. There is no money in it, and even if there is a money, loss and damage fund was for emergency. Uh, Now, if the access to loss and damage fund is fulfilling all the check boxes and all the conditions, I was in New York in September, and I was discussing with some international colleagues that it's just like in India and Pakistan, where a patient is accident or gunshot patient is taken to a private hospital, and the hospital will tell you go for a medical legal checkup, and only then the doctor would touch it. And by the time all the formalities are completed, the patient may have expired. The similar is with the loss and damage fund, that all the formalities they have actually linked with loss and damage fund. And right now, loss and damage fund is hosted with World Bank. Now, if one has to access to this emergency fund by fulfilling condition, as one is getting a loan or grants from World Bank or IMF or ADB, again, the countries like Pakistan, they would remain at loss. So while the advocacy or the campaign for added funding, for added finances, that would remain an important part and parcel of COP29. An equally important thing is uh, easy access to these funds, transparency in these funds, so that this funding is not rebranded and relabeled. So we know that even Geneva pledges after Pakistan's floods, many of our bilateral creditors, they actually relabeled their loans, and those were declared as pledges for Pakistan flood. So transparency, access, and the third important component of this is that adequacy of debt fund, that fund is adequate to meet the requirement of uh, these developing countries. Now, my final point is we also need to contest the definition of climate vulnerable countries. As of today, Spain is a climate vulnerable country. Spain yesterday lost 250 lives were lost in this flood in Spain. The whole year of rain Spain received in 8 hours, and then it got flooded. And in a European country, uh, uh, losing 250 lives to flood, that was completely unheard of. So Spain is a climate vulnerable country. America keeps on receiving different typhoons and cyclone. America is climate vulnerable country. Canada, last year, the Canadian forest fires, uh, you see, the whole uh, this amount of emission that Canada emits due to its industrial and vehicular activities, the forest fires in Canada emitted uh, more emission than Canada's industrial and vehicular emission. So we need to contest the definition of climate vulnerable countries. We are talking of climate vulnerable developing countries. If we don't use the word developing in it, we will be in trouble, because then there will be more contestants for any fund that comes. Now, again, with the developing, the problem comes, the in multilateral negotiation, the world has no problem supporting developing country, but India is a developing country too, and China is a developing country too, and Brazil is a developing country too, and South Africa is a developing country too, and that actually creates the problem. Now, another proposition that gets floated there at every COP, that where developed world, they come and they say that we don't mind helping poor countries. We cannot help China and India and Brazil and South Africa. They are emerging economies and they need to contribute. They should be on giving end rather than at receiving end. And again, if we challenge it, we will be challenging the whole solidarity of G77 plus China. If we don't challenge it, it would remain a non-starter because of this self-adopted definition of who is developing and who is non-developed. So another bottleneck for any of the funding or any of the finance that comes in is this definitional issue. Now, to conclude, I feel that perhaps multilateral sources of funding, those would be too difficult and too controversial and too non-transparent. One thing that we are not focusing upon is the private sector funding. So foundations and private sector funding that private sector is actually investing into these green and clean companies. We, for a long time, we used to think that private sector is part of problem. I think it's about time we need to take them as part of solution, and we need to actually compel them to invest. And as I said, that private sector would invest not only for the love of environment, but also to remain competitive in this rapidly changing trade regime, where environment and climate change would become a mandatory and compulsory requirement to export to anywhere. Now, I can see Pakistan's private sector is already taking some initiative. The textile sector, they have already started now getting adapted to the CBAM requirement. So a couple of groups in Faisalabad and in Karachi, they are already working on getting their carbon emission level measured and then try to reduce it. But the problem is only they can pay the type of fee which Vera or Gold Standard would charge in dollars. Many of the small groups, they would not have that sort of capacity. So we need to think, and that I'm concluding here, while we're talking of climate financing, there is no blank check. We keep on cursing that these were the funds and Pakistan's share is negligible. Pakistan can only claim its share if we have doable, tangible, pragmatic, convincing proposals and action plans. If those action plans are not there, we will not be able to get benefit from any of these initiatives. The second, the government need to start on an emergency basis tackling CBAM so that our exports and our trades, they remain competitive. And in order to do it, the foremost and first requirement to have as many nationally accrediting agencies which are charging their fee in rupees, not in dollars, so that the small and medium entrepreneurs part of supply chain and many of our exporters and manufacturers, they can actually get themselves accredited and verified. And the NDC that is being revised now will be sharing our next NDC in 2025. There is one thing we need to put on table. I keep saying it, and on the cost of repetition, let me say it again, just to give you the magnitude of climate finance. You see, the floods damage, loss and damage assessment was $30 billion. The Geneva pledges were $9 billion, $9.5 billion. Most of those pledges we couldn't receive during first 2 years because those got linked with Pakistan being in an IMF program and be a compliant of World Bank loan agreements, etc. In the third year, when we were in this standby program, we started receiving money. the EAD can correct the numbers, but I think the last time I saw it a few months ago, it was around $3.5 billion that we have received, one third of the pledges. If one go to any of the flood affected areas, at least 30 to 40% life is back on track, which means it's the communities. Even if it is 30%, it means $10 billion has been spent because $30 billion was the loss. If it's one third, life is back on normal. $10 billion has been spent by communities, by governments, by local philanthropy, and we need to actually count it and we need to put it on table when we are negotiating. Instead of our vulnerability lens, we need to actually go to COP saying that yes, we are vulnerable, but we are a resilient nation. We can cope with these disasters through our domestic finances that we have already invested. And the proof is that international pledges were only a peanut of what was our flood losses. The rest of it is invested by communities, by governments. So this is our contribution. Now we want a matching grant or a matching fund or a matching financing. So when we will say matching financing, our case becomes automatically strong that we can negotiate. So we are not a country that keep relying on international flow of funds and remaining vulnerable. We are a country which is vulnerable. Even if there is no international finance, we have the resilience to go back on track. And that is, I think, the whole crux of climate financing. First, account for what we are contributing, take it to COP, put it on table, and then negotiate at an equal level playing field. Then going there with our hand like a recipient and trying to showcase our vulnerability. Vulnerabilities will not impact or affect anyone in COP because the whole world is vulnerable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abid Saab. We'll have the Chairman SCCP's address video recorded.
Takeaways from the workshop. This session will be a major step forward in developing climate finance. Joining us today as we discuss a critical topic, the role of financial markets in combating climate change. As the world faces the escalating impact of climate change, every sector must contribute to building a more resilient, sustainable future. In this endeavor, I would like to briefly touch upon some of the initiatives taken by Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan to embed sustainability into Pakistan's financial framework. As you are all aware, Pakistan ranks among the top 10 countries most affected by climate change, with climate-related losses amounting to nearly 3.8 billion annually. This makes it clear that climate financing is critical for developing countries like Pakistan. The tangible efforts have to be made to mitigate and adapt our actions to address climate change. Our commitment to climate finance aligns with Pakistan's national climate policies and global agreements, including the Paris Accord and the Sustainable Development Goals. And we firmly believe that by establishing frameworks for climate finance, we can guide the financial sector towards sustainable practices and address climate risks while unlocking economic growth. Our approach integrates environmental, social, and governance (ESG) principles into financial regulations, bridging the gap between economic development and environmental responsibility. To support this vision, the SECP has introduced various regulatory interventions, which include in order to promote green finance, contribute positively towards protection of environment and combat climate change. SECP published guidelines for issuance of green bonds in 2021. SECP has collaborated with various organizations, including SPDI, the Asian Development Bank, FCDO, etc., for exploring avenues for introducing required ecosystem for green bond market in Pakistan. Introducing SECP's Environmental, Social and Governance ESG guidelines in 2024. ESG disclosure guidelines have been introduced to encourage public and private companies to report on their climate-related risks and environmental performance. This information is vital for investors, allowing them to make informed decisions aligned with sustainability goals. Amendments in the Code of Corporate Governance is the next. In 2024, to ensure that the boards of listed companies have ESG policies in place, introduction of stewardship guidelines for institutional investors to make them aware of their responsibilities as stewards of the capital and encourage actions which promote sustainability. Actively encouraging innovation through the regulatory sandbox to give opportunities to individuals and companies to participate directly in the green economy by submitting new product services, including use of fintech in promoting sustainable investment products and green financing solutions. And recently, the launch of comprehensive 5-year strategic plan Journey to an Insured Pakistan. The plan outlines priorities for expanding access to insurance products with a strong focus on inclusive, disaster, and agriculture insurance. It includes 11 key priority areas and 62 action items, laying the groundwork to ensure that insurance services reach underserved population across Pakistan. Ladies and gentlemen, as a regulator with a vast mandate, we are well aware of the environmental and social responsibility we carry. And I personally believe that our financial sector is well positioned to drive climate action. The corporate sector, the capital market, NBFCs and insurance have the resources, reach, and influence to support Pakistan's transition towards sustainable growth. In addition to regulatory frameworks, events such as these prove the importance of partnerships. It is with this mindset that we have actively worked with the global standard setters such as IOSCO and the UN to build capacity among our regulated sectors, understand and manage climate risks and opportunities effectively. Based on international best practices, the SECP is considering to adopt IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standard in a phase-wise manner in Pakistan. Just this month, we have initiated public consultation on the criteria and timelines for the adoption of these standards. Adoption of these standards is an important milestone in ESG regulatory roadmap of Pakistan and represents SECP's commitment to align capital market with global best practices and promote a culture of integrating sustainable business practices into business strategies. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize that SECP remains dedicated to collaborating with all stakeholders, government bodies, private sector, non-profits, and international organizations to collectively achieve the goal of climate resilient financing in Pakistan. By aligning policy efforts and facilitating public-private partnerships, we can unlock greater investments in climate resilience and bring sustainability solutions to the forefront. I thank each of you, State Bank of Pakistan, the National Institute of Banking and Finance, IBE Center for Executive Education, Sustainable Development Policy Institute, and the Chief Organizer, Mr. Syed Buland Suhail, for your support in this journey. Together, we can create a sustainable future, ensuring that Pakistan's financial sector becomes a beacon of resilience, responsibility in face of climate change. Thank you.
Next, we have Dr. Siddharth MD, Zika, National Energy Efficiency.
Am I audible? Am I audible? Minute.
Ji, Sardar Sahab, you are. We can hear you loud and clear.
Thank you.
Yes, you're audible.
Thank you. So I think after such a great speakers and some of these points that have been highlighted, I think a lot of it connects to what I am being sort of working upon and some of these things that are being discussed. When it talks all about the CBAM, when it talks about all about these other initiative on the governance, I think the role of energy efficiency and conservation plays a very important part into it. Because when we look into how intense our industries, domestic consumers, and all these other aspects in our societies, even our transport sector is, so this gives us this whole idea that how effectively we can work on energy efficiency and conservation part. And that exactly leads us towards this whole concept that how we can have a just transition. Because moving from the fossil fuels to renewable energy towards other aspects of carbon storage and sequestration, I think it's important for us to understand that how we can reach out to some of these other aspects. So I think there are other aspects which can be discussed, but I would like to focus on this one very important aspect that we looked into the demand side of energy efficiency, and where we see a very important thing that our demand, especially from the summer to winter, how the demand has changed. So in winter, we see our total demand where our installed capacity is 30,000, above 30,000 megawatts. Our total demand is less than 10 to 12,000 megawatts. Now the question is, when we move to the summers, our demand reaches somewhere around 30,000 megawatts. So the question is where this 20,000 megawatts goes into. And I think this is where we have played this whole the data-driven mechanisms for policy making and program design. And we looked into this aspect that 20,000 megawatts exactly goes into the cooling side, the cooling of especially what we use for air conditioning and fans. And I think primarily, when we looked into this aspect, we are facing major challenge like how we are designing our buildings. And our building codes, especially energy conservation side, is a big question mark, which we need to address in the long term. But I think initially addressing this problem, we have seen this, that fans are major component that needs to be addressed. So currently, when we looked into it, we have 147 million fans installed, and out of which, when we calculated some of these aspects like how we can develop something around it, we picked a decent number of 88 million fans. Now the question is what exactly we are looking into this whole aspect of fan making and what exactly goes into it. So our current fan manufacturing or the installed fans are 120 watts fan. Imagine this huge population of installed fan using 120 watts, and then we can multiply it with the number of usage, and then replacing it with 30 watts fan with the same usage. So this estimated number shows us that there can be somewhere around 3 to 5,000 megawatts saving. It's just a very simple aspect that everyone in their house use the fan, but they have no idea like how we can replace it, why we should replace it, and we don't care about it. So this is where I think the climate finance aspect, and I would not say like from the international perspective, but it's a very indigenous local program that has been worked out where the banks, State Bank, the Government of Pakistan Power Division, NICA, and all these other agencies, especially including the private sector fan manufacturers associations and the fan, they played a very important role. And they come up with this whole idea that we designed this program that we are going to replace your existing inefficient fan, which is maybe some of them are more than 120 watts, with 30 watts fan. And this whole financing is being offered by the banks, where the finance division is providing risk guarantee of 1.5 billion for these fans. Now, with this 1.5 billion risk guarantee, the fans which will be offered based on the loan to the consumers will be offered at KIBOR plus 2%. And in the recent days, we have seen a reduction in KIBOR. So it's making program more and more lucrative. And at the same time, I think there is another aspect that we are looking into, that once this what is in it for the consumer. So we used another lever, and where we are worked out on this aspect, like this will be an on-bill financing mechanisms, that there will be on one side, whoever the consumer will be paying back this money through installments through their bills. And the amount of installment will exactly be equal to the savings that one will get with the replacement of this fan. And that installment is exactly what they have to pay back to the banks, where we were getting this concessional sort of a loan, where the government is providing first loss guarantee. So it's important aspect that on one side, this loan facility is being offered. This is exactly the climate finance. And on the other side, another lever is putting in place where we are providing on-bill financing, that these installments are there. And there's also provide a security mechanism that even for the small ticket items, there is this mechanism that can affect your access if you're not going to pay the bill. I think this is very important for us to understand it at this point, that yes, we are looking for the climate finance at international level, because the responsibility that of polluting and then who is suffering for that goes internationally as well. But I think it's also important that what are our domestic indigenous innovative mechanisms available with us that we can utilize to address climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation aspects, and how we can effectively develop different mechanisms around it. This is just one program that how we are effectively developing using, this whole technology-based, portal-based mechanisms, and then how effectively it provides a consumer a support to that. And I think this is how we are seeing the circular economy being developed and the carbon emissions reductions goals being achieved into that. I think I also want to highlight another aspect that we have recently worked it out, that we need some sort of regulations which effectively helps us to develop these mechanisms, that the standards should be utilized to provide effective, useful products that can help us reduce CO2 emissions and decouple our energy consumption and reduce it, making consumers and overall industry more cost effective, and competitive internationally. Thank you very much. If there is any question, I'm here to take these questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a pretty busy lineup and we were a bit late also, so we'll take questions maybe later in the end if we have time. But thank you, Dr. Saab. That was a very good discussion. We have Rahmat Kamal Gangro, partner Heather Motra & Co. She's going to speak about the legal classification of carbon credits. We're talking about climate financing, but the basic unit is the carbon credit that is generated. And so far, we have not classified this this as a commodity or as a legal right, or we don't know what it is. So, Rahmat, please, over to you.
Thank you, Bulant. Sorry, Bulant, the sharing is not on. Oh, now it is. Okay, hold on one second. Let me share it. Sorry, 1 second, please. Apologies, just trying to share the screen. 1 second. You show me in the presenter view. Idhar kar do, mere samne kar do. Ji, assalamu alaikum everyone. Can you see the presentation as well?
Yes, we can.
Okay,
Please,
fantastic.
you can commence.
Okay. Sorry, I can't see it now. 1 second. Okay, anyways, I will start nonetheless. So, assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Rahmat Kamal Gangro. I'm a partner at Heather Motra. Thank you for the introduction, Bulant. Firstly, what we have discussed today has been some great food for thought on the sector of carbon credits, and there's been a lot of thought on how to catalyze the sector. And particularly what we want to discuss is some legal fundamentals that should be in place to make carbon credits generated in Pakistan more robust. Now, particularly, we're going to talk about what the legal nature of carbon credits is and our learnings from certain projects that we have been involved in. For example, in the mangrove regeneration projects happening in Sindh, we're currently working on a carbon credit PPP project for the government of Sindh. And other than that, renewable energy projects as well. Now, as you're all already aware, there's carbon credits are generated from two various modes, carbon emissions or carbon removals. And the carbon unit that is generated from these activities is recognized by the carbon standard and comes into existence upon issuance of the carbon credit. Now, giving this context a global framework. Now, the fundamental question of what is the legal nature of carbon credits has already risen on a global level. Interestingly, there's a report of earlier this year from Unistral, which specifically states that the carbon credits are the legal characterization is far from consistent across jurisdictions, and that no global standard has developed in this precise issue yet. And the emerging approaches that are being taken is either that carbon credits are an intangible property or are being developed as a bundle of contractual rights. And just to give you a flavor of how it's being addressed in various jurisdictions, for example, in England and Wales, it is likely to be defined as an intangible property, whereas in the USA, there's an extensive commodity framework. And particularly, for example, in Australia, there's an extensive legal framework which defines this as a personal property. And the importance of defining what the legal nature of carbon credits has also been emphasized and has been identified by entities like the International Emissions Trading Association, which has developed model documentation for carbon trading and sale of carbon credits. And they've identified this as a key legal risk, which needs to be looked at on a domestic level, because the legal nature of the carbon credits and will impact certain transaction structuring aspects, will impact the type of security that can be created, and the nature and manner of enforcement over securities of carbon credits. Now, having now looked at this on a domestic level, we've extensively reviewed laws in Pakistan and established that carbon credits is not yet defined specifically under the applicable laws of Pakistan. And we've already touched on why this is important. Now, it relates to the mode of transfer of ownership. As you already know, that movable and immovable property have different modes and costs associated to such transfer. And carbon credits, obviously, we know get traded. And so that's a very key due diligence point that comes up many times. The applicable taxation regime, the accounting principles that are applicable, the nature of collateral that it can create, we already discussed that, and the overall regulatory regime that can apply. Now, we would look at which bucket do these now fall in, movable or immovable, and within that, the subcategorizations of actionable claims, money or goods. And our recommendation and our recommendations for what the initial first action points should be is to introduce a level of clarity on the legal nature of carbon credits. And one possible solution, and we're not saying this is definitive, but one possible solution which we are exploring is whether this can be codified under the Sale of Goods Act as a good. So that would make it akin to, for example, shares, which are also defined under the Sale of Goods Act, and can also then, the benefit of doing this is that we're using the existing legal framework and statutory framework instead of having a complete overhaul to make an enabling environment. And this can easily also translate into our securities laws to enable trading of carbon credits. So without doing too much, we need to create an enabling environment. And that is one aspect, is the legal nature. The second aspect, and which has already been extensively discussed over the last 2 days, is the regulatory environment, the state bank incentives, the FBR incentives, and those can create a very enabling environment without over-regulation at this point, which is what we would suggest as a key recommendation. And you've all discussed in detail what those recommendations can be with respect to specific industries like EVs and agriculture, et cetera, which we discussed on day one. Now, there's two other buckets of future considerations. Now, from a policy perspective, going forward, we need to think about, do we want to continue to leverage the existing legal regime, which we suggested on, previously relating to the Sale of Goods Act and the securities laws that we already have? Or do we want to get into creating a whole new legislative framework like other countries have done, like India, Australia? And that's something to consider on a policy level. Weigh the pros and cons of that, and eventually to establish a national registry akin to the CDC. The second aspect, which is directly related to financing, is the type of securities that can be created over carbon credits. Now, whether can we create a hypothecation, can we create assignment, can we do a pledge? We already know that there's certain legal limitations to pledge, which involves, for example, physical possession. Now, can we draw on and leverage other regimes that we have, for example, pledge over electronic shares as done in the CDC, or electronic warehousing receipts, again, to create an enabling environment for security creation. A second aspect of security creation is the state bank's role in recognizing carbon credits as a acceptable collateral, and to feature that, especially when there's local financing taking place, and to recognize that under the state bank's regulations and prudential regulations in particular. And lastly, I'd like to touch on the fact that there needs to be an awareness and consistency with the carbon standards. For example, we already know that the carbon standards don't allow you at present to mark a security over the carbon credits in those registries. They don't currently recognize the beneficial ownership of such security holders. Now, particularly, this is a global conversation that is happening. And while there's no legal restriction on creating the securities, it is the enforcement of securities which is currently a bit difficult in view of that. And so this is something that we should keep an eye on a global level, and we would need to remain consistent with that. So these are our key recommendations and some actionable points for the immediate future. And we look forward to keeping the conversation going with other stakeholders. And we would love to hear thoughts from other legal thinkers on this point as well. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Please do share with us the slides. We promised to share all the materials with the participants. Thank you so much. Now I'd like to invite Kamran Bilgrami. He's the director of IBA Center for Executive Education and IBA ADR International Center, and soon to be also the director of the Climate Center.
तो जब तक मेरी पावर पॉइंट लग रही है, अस्सलाम वालेकुम एवरीवन. Thank you so much for taking out time this Saturday and making us the host today. जब तक पावर पॉइंट लग रही, I would like to highlight a few things. बहुत सारी चीजें आज डिस्कस हुई and it seems like कि हम इस मुल्क की जो ईंट उठाएंगे तो कोई ना कोई climate related काम निकलेगा. तो there is so much to do, and linking it to one quote from Sir David Attenborough, the world needs the great reset on the climate side. अगर आप उनकी recent documentaries देखें, every documentary is quoting this one quotation, the great reset of climate. तो world ने COVID year में तो देखा great reset और हमारे fresh air और सारी चीजें हो गई थी, but we need to work around this. तो मैं before I head towards the education part, I would like to highlight one thing to all of you, which is alarming for our country. So to do this, so I'll talk about the 6th Nawab of Hyderabad Deccan. So we are aware of the Deccan family, the Nawabs. So मैं जब छोटा था तो घर में अलमारियां होती थी, आज घरों में wardrobes हैं, हर एक के घर में walk-in closets and so on. और जब मैं छोटा था तो कपड़े कम होते थे, अब हर एक के पास बहुत सारे कपड़े लटके हुए होते हैं. And we need to every day choose from all these clothes, every one of us. So the world's largest closet ever is made by the 6th Nawab of Hyderabad Deccan. तो वो 6-7 साल की उम्र में नवाब बने थे. He died after 50-60 years. And the alarming thing for me in this generation and future generation, if we read about this story, this closet was 176 feet long with 2 stories, a manual lift. And he used to wear, along with his family, at least on average 3 to 4 clothes every day. और वो कोई भी कपड़ा दोबारा पहनते नहीं थे. और end of year 6,000 clothes, 6,000 of them, the family used to donate to the community around him. So if we talk about textile factories, so I was watching this video about United Nations, जो उनकी short clippings आजकल आती हैं on Facebook, LinkedIn. हमने हमारी दुनिया की factories ने as of today next 6 generations के कपड़े produce कर लिए. And by 2050 हम next 15 generation से 20 generation के कपड़े produce कर चुके होंगे. हमारे पास 24 बिलियन चिकन्स हैं जो 50 बिलियन हो जाएंगी पूरी दुनिया में. सो ये थोड़ी छोटी 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 स्टैट्स हैं जो हम सबको पता है ये बात. I think the world really needs the great reset. And to start with, Pakistan always takes initiative, whether it is corporate governance or climate. And I will request all of you to think on these grounds. And one thing clubbing to it, तो हमारा campus IBA City campus सदर में है, main MA जिना रोड पे, और आप में से कुछ लोग आए. So अक्सर मेरा traffic jam की वजह से MA जिना रोड क्रॉस करता हूँ टावर की तरफ से. I live in DH. So for last many years, I've been observing Bolton Market and Lighthouse and all these streets. जो कार्ट्स हैं, ठेले हैं, वो उबल रहे हैं, बाहर आ रहे हैं सड़कों से, मेन रोड्स पे. मेन रोड ब्लॉक होती है इसी वजह से. Why? Because all these containers, the charity containers are coming in from the world. और अगर आप कुछ अर्सा पहले चले जाएं, 3-4 साल पहले, तो Singapore has refused to receive these containers from the world and they have shifted to Indian subcontinent. And I request Justice Mansoor Ali Shah, lead कर रहे हैं, COP29 जा रहे हैं. We are not the junkyard of the world for these containers coming in. हाँ, though it supports our communities, हमारी different classes को हो गया, उनको cheap clothes और cheap वो मिल जाते हैं, but वो imagine कि इस वक्त हमारे पास क्या आ चुका है already जिसकी ज़रूरत नहीं है. And one example is 2004 ज़लज़ला और 2010 सैलाब, कि वहीं पर लोग ये कह रहे थे कि हमें ये कपड़े नहीं, हमें आप रोटी ला के दें. तो कपड़े तो बहुत सारे ऑलरेडी 2004 से मौजूद हैं पाकिस्तान में. सो क्योंकि हम वर्ल्ड के लिए टेक्सटाइल भी प्रोड्यूस करते हैं. सो ऑन दिस नोट, द ग्रेट क्लाइमेट रीसेट, आई विल स्टार्ट माय प्रेजेंटेशन. आई एम रिप्रेजेंटिंग सेंटर फॉर एग्जीक्यूटिव एजुकेशन of IBA Karachi, IBA being the state-owned business school in the country. We Can you change the slide? I cannot change the
अभी मेरे सिर्फ कमरे में जा सकते हैं, अंदर वाले कमरे में नहीं जा सकते, सिर्फ बेडरूम. ये बाहर से लग गई है टाकी और मॉप? नहीं, वो सारा गंदा है नीचे पर.
जी, उनकी सफाई की भी बात हो रही. Okay, so we are the largest executive education provider in the country, and every day I meet people in the industry, and we work around public sector, state-owned enterprises, provincial government, secretarial departments, the corporates, the banks, and the family businesses across 10 cities in Pakistan. And luckily, May 2023, we have started one small satellite office. Riyaz Sonara Saab and supported us here, right here at Nibaf. That's why you're sitting here. And to do all this, next slide. Left पे जो blocks हैं ये MBA subjects हैं, but right पे all these sectors हम इन corporate governance से लेके vocational training तक provide करते हैं as a service to the nation. We do capacity building and research around all these industries. And that's why हमारा जो spectrum है, I'm claiming we are the largest in the country. Next, please. There is a reason I showed you this slide. Next. So what I call this forum is the climate resolution in Pakistan. Next. Okay, ये थोड़े छोटे font हैं, but last workshop में and today we have seen representations from association, chambers, high courts, legal bodies, financial institutions, corporate enterprise partners, government and public sector, universities and institutions, and the NGOs. And I think moving forward, we should not work in silos in our own domains. We should work in synergy, having this forum to start with. इसकी कोई council बना लेते हैं, कोई forum बना लेते हैं, कोई think tank बना लेते हैं, and I'm willing to host this think tank regularly alongside with Nibaf in Islamabad, alongside with Nibaf in Pakistan, in Karachi, and anywhere you want us to host. Because Nibaf is present through State Bank in all 5-6 leading cities in Pakistan. So we can host these think tanks on different sectors as IBA. Sir, आप मुझे guide कर दीजिएगा if you'd like to add anything during your speech. Next slide. Okay. And we also found a few partnerships globally, and we are exploring a few others, a leading climate related partnerships. So European Union team visited 3 months ago. Starting January, we are working closely with them on climate and ADR both. I'm about to sign up Commonwealth. So Commonwealth, again, after the King came in, they've started memberships, countrywide memberships, and the Commonwealth countries are coming up with all these memberships, and they're providing all these platforms within the Commonwealth countries. IFC, we are about to, LUMS and IBA have signed up an agreement with IFC, and we are about to introduce climate finance governance programs in the country, starting with training of trainer. The MOUs have been shared, they will be signed this or next week, and in next 2 to 3 months, we will be coming up with these programs. Not to mention CCP people are sitting here. We are also working around corporate governance and inclusion of CCP contents around climate, particularly in our corporate governance classrooms. Alongside all these UK, US bodies, and myself and Buland also visited Asia Pacific Center for Environment Law. Justice Jawad Hassan's uncle created that, and US Environmental Research Institute when we were there in the Singapore Convention Week in September. Next. So इसकी तस्वीरें आपको मिलेंगी, ये सिंगापुर एम्बेसडर में भी हम मुलाकात हुई, and they also talked about climate. तो हम इसके बारे में आपको वर्किंग पेपर भेज देंगे कि हमारी क्या वहाँ पे बात हुई, and so on. Next please. This is Malaysia again. Me and Bulant visited there and met the ambassador, the businessmen, the ADR centers, and we spoke about again ADR and climate. Next. So what we can do from IBS platform, we can initiate trainings, awareness, advocacy, climate finance, advisory committees and think tanks, climate governance, policy and development, capacity building, qualifications, certifications, both national and international, research and development. So we don't have, I think we don't have, I have to check, but we don't have any research journal available in 350 plus universities in Pakistan. So we should think of a climate related research journal formally approved by HEC, maybe housed at IB or any other university, but this should be there. And networking forums such as this one. Next, please. So I have some recommendations based out of what I just mentioned. So HEC and education boards across country should declare a climate emergency, and we as universities, colleges and schools, we should do awareness sessions. There should be around climate science, sustainability and climate policy. And we can ask all these students to come up with policy papers and recommendations. We can approach the students because they're younger, they bring more energy and more knowledge. Mandatory climate education for regulated sectors. So since we host boards and leadership programs, so like corporate governance, climate finance should be a mandatory course as awareness. So we should work along with State Bank, SECP, Stock Exchange, CCP and Pakistan Engineering Council and other bodies in synergy to bring awareness to the boards and leadership across country. And particularly the high emission industries, right? The other thing that I would like to highlight is academy and industry joint linkages. So here is one forum where all of us are present, but we should formalize it around climate research, innovation, and sustainable practices with specific tracks. I just mentioned that. And with global partners and local partners, we can do knowledge exchange programs with faculty and students. Again, all of this awareness campaigns, maybe through media people are present here, maybe through TV dramas and so on. Sir David Attenborough is the best example. We have Discover Pakistan channel. We can do all these road shows on mass scale, not only universities, colleges, and Sadir Ali Saab just quoted me when I was showing this presentation. These should be learning journeys from fundamental to advanced level knowledge and not bombardment of information. A learning journey is consistent in nature, sustainable in nature. Next slide. And to summarize it, three things. We establish a task force within HEC to oversee climate curriculum, develop certification programs along with regulatory bodies, and create frameworks for academy industrial partnerships. So at IBA, we'll do this. We'll create the working papers, or me and Buland, along with Nibaf, will do some homework and we'll bring it back to you, all of you, to think upon. Next slide. One thing, जो ये Velectra है. So 5 महीने पहले मैंने अपनी सेकंड कार बेची और Velectra खरीदी. जो सेकंड कार बेचने के जो पैसे बचे वो मुझे पता था कि वो अंदाजा हुआ कि आजकल बैंक 22% दे रहे हैं, जो अभी 15-16%, तो वो पैसे मैंने उधर डाल दिए. दिस बाइक, तो मैंने एक्सपेरिमेंट लिया शौक में. नो मेंटेनेंस, नो ऑयल, नथिंग. आप सिर्फ शोरूम से निकालें एंड इट्स लिटरली ड्राइविंग अ साइकिल. सिर्फ हैंडल है, नो गियर, नथिंग. The reason I am showing this picture कि मैं sometimes ऑफिस भी commute कर जाता हूँ इस पे, और and I am enjoying it. Reason is मेरे दिल में होता है कि combustion engine से थोड़ा try करें. The third reason is it's also saving me money. Why? Because 1 unit charge it goes 120 kilometers, और मुझे पूरे 1 महीने में मैंने calculate किया 300 से 400 रुपए मेरे खर्च हुए. So you just buy this bike. इसकी बैटरी lithium ion है. This is made in Pakistan. So I am giving back to Pakistan my money. So मैं कोई Chinese car और Japanese car वो मैंने रखी हुई थी, वो मैंने बेची. और just letting you know कि practice हम खुद शुरू करें. At the Center for Executive Education, one last bit. मैंने जब 2 साल पहले join किया तो we used to host all these classrooms like this one. तो एक साल में 30,000 स्मॉल वाटर बॉटल्स हम लोग यूज कर रहे थे. तो वो प्रोजेक्टेड हमारा काम भी बढ़ा है तो 50,000 हो जाती हैं, 100,000 हो जाती हैं. सो अ ईयर बैक मैंने 200 ग्लास वाटर बॉटल से वो रिप्लेस कर दी. सो इमेजिन वन स्मॉल वाटर बॉटल 300 years of its life. So I'm trying my level best, whether it is home or office or work environment, and educating everyone how to do small bits to around us. So whether it is बंदर रोड की वो ठेले हैं, अगर आप लोग उसमें कुछ एजुकेट कर सके उन्हें कि भाई आप कंटेनर हमें मत भेजें, आप कंटेनर के लिए कुछ और करें, या पर्सनल लेवल पर ये सारे काम हम इनिशिएट कर सकते हैं. So with this note, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kamran. This is very much the beginning, I believe, of efforts on climate on multiple levels. It's not the end. But thank you also so much for your offer to keep this dialogue a perpetual dialogue. Hopefully, we'll be able to add many more stakeholders to this dialogue. So with this, I'll invite Mr. Zain Kazmi and Leah Boyer of Safeda Climate Advisory. They're taking the lead in establishing the first VVB entity in Pakistan, and they were going to share with us a roadmap. Welcome, Zain and Leah.
Thank you so much, Buland, for inviting us to this important forum. Safeda Climate Advisory is a local VVB, hopefully launching in 2025. Our aim is to reduce the cost of these services in Pakistan and expand access to consulting services like this in the country in local currency, as has been pointed out earlier. Currently, the situation is that we feel the first step in the process of getting carbon credits commonly used in Pakistan is to incentivize them. So without increasing the regulatory and financial burden on the country. Under the current IMF dispensation, subsidies and benefits are out of the question. As a dollar-denominated asset, the GOP should incentivize its development. So reflecting what Haider Mota was saying, one thing we could do is call carbon credits and export. The accreditation agencies for carbon credits will have to be strictly defined by the law in order to qualify for Verra and Gold Standard. A transparent public record will need to be made for authorities to track all verified projects. In that vein, a national registry can be launched in collaboration with Verra. This will increase the appeal of Pakistan's voluntary carbon market in international markets. It will give the authorities power to track incentives, tax breaks, and currency flows. Government bodies have to take the lead in this process with Verra in order to design and maintain this carbon registry. In order to pay for the registry, we suggest that using the flow of money from carbon credits can be shared with a public entity such as SPP, and the fee could also cover certain oversight functions as well as promote activities for carbon market capacity building. So there are precedents for this all around the world: Indonesia, Kenya, South Africa, and more. What we imagine to be the third step is capacity building needs to be done across the board for stakeholders. We all have the will, but we need to find the way and the local capacity in order to get this done. The GOP and public institutions should engage workshops, training, and engagement with other developing economies that have rolled out similar successful initiatives. Most importantly, we would like to advocate for local VVBs to reduce project costs and building local capacity. This takes time, and engagement with foreign VVBs will be required. But in order to localize, we'll have to go hand in hand. And after a few years, we hope to reduce the costs for this carbon credit substantially. I suggest we engage foreign donors, IFIs, and embassies with clear goal of establishing a Verra-focused voluntary carbon market. The reason for that is the regulatory burden for VCMs is much lower than the gold standard from Europe, and flexible enough to begin private sector contracts directly with other private sector companies overseas that are looking to buy these credits. We can easily declare a roadmap to this. For example, $50 million of carbon credits by 2027. And again, I'm glad to see that different universities are here, especially IBA, taking a lead in this. So we would engage universities as centers of excellence for receiving grants and training future team leads. I think the fourth very important step is to inform and advocate for developing a carbon market. One of the main reasons is that the private sector and the public sector is not aware of what projects are possible. VCM in particular is able to be much more flexible in proposing innovative projects. For that purpose, I think universities and public institutions can establish centers of excellence across the country. These centers of excellence can promote a carbon offset projects to the private sector through project advisory and feasibility. What we imagine is a private sector individual can walk into a university, perhaps under the framework of ORIC, and suggest help work with these institutions to commercialize these opportunities. So we imagine also that these universities would develop their own specializations. Perhaps a business university would develop a specialization in the development of the market and marketing these carbon credits overseas, and possibly a forestry department can help in afforestation projects. Again, there are many precedents for these, and across the board for all these steps, there are precedents internationally for example, declaring carbon credits as commodities, establishing carbon registries, building capacity is a very common activity in developing countries, and advocacy is obviously an essential part. So thank you very much, and we're looking forward to assisting the public and private sector in developing this market.
Hi, And this is Leah Boye Saifullah. And the one thing I wanted to mention on this behalf is I saw a comment on the screen, but also yesterday as well. We're not proposing a European style cap and trade market. This is not about local mandates for carbon emissions. That can be done eventually, but this is about the voluntary carbon market, which will help to immediately start financing carbon reduction infrastructure projects around the country. So these are international engineering standards that are applied onto these projects, done in partnership with an international body. And then we keep track of them on our registry, but this has nothing to do with internal trading or internal limiting. This would then be to directly sell via Vera, which is what we're suggesting, on the international market to mostly markets like the United States, Central and South America, Africa, and others, East Asia, who might be interested. It's a bit more difficult to sell these in Europe as they are part of a very strict cap and trade market. So if anyone has any questions surrounding that, I think the internal program is a much longer issue. And while we, of course, should be concerned with our own emissions, particularly for our own health and the future of our planet, Pakistan is not nearly one of the largest emitters on the planet. And so this is about making sure that we can move forward with industrialization within Pakistan, while also finding financing for those projects that we so desperately need.
Thank you, Leah Boyer Saifullah Marwat, as she likes to be called. Thank you, Zan. That was really informative. I'm really excited about the next panel. It's an international panel. We have Dr. Lydia Umuku Jung, who's done a lot of work in Pakistan on voluntary markets and framework for the Ministry of Climate Change. She's a senior consultant at Climate Focus, which is a German and Netherlands-based climate advisory. We have Dr. Megan Baumann, who's a leading expert on the legal interactions with climate finance. She's written a tremendous amount of books and articles on the subject, and we're very grateful that you're here, Dr. Baumann. Last but not least, we have Dr. Mary Claire Cordiner Seeger from University of Cambridge. She's part of the Cambridge Governance and Law Initiative, a pretty strong feature at COP. She's also Senior Director of the Center for International Sustainable Development Law and Chair in Sustainable Development Law Policy at the University of Cambridge. So welcome, international colleagues. I will start with inviting Dr. Lydia to share her experiences with the audience.
I hope you can hear me and see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Let me do this. Thank you. Thank you so much, Bule, for the invitation. And yeah, I'm very, very glad to be here and to be speaking again back in Pakistan. As Bule mentioned, I'm a senior legal counsel at Climate Focus, and I have been working in Pakistan for almost a year when we were working with USAID on trying to understand what are some of the gaps and challenges that are hindering the scaling of high integrity carbon market activities in Pakistan. And based on this, we prepared and we had a lot of consultations in Pakistan with the private sector, the public sector, but also governments both at the federal and at the provincial level. And we came up with some recommendations on what different actors can do. And some of these recommendations were taken up by USAID, and they supported, one of it was supporting the private sector on trying to navigate carbon project development where they had an accelerator program for the private sector, but also we had a public sector bit of it where we were supporting regulatory frameworks on carbon market framework on regulatory frameworks on carbon market. And this is still in draft form, and I understand this is still under consideration and discussion. So I'm very excited to be back again here. And what I'll do is just a very quick overview of why carbon market legal frameworks are necessary. And some of them have already been touched upon, so I'll try not to repeat what has already been said. And I think the bigger question is why carbon markets for Pakistan? And I think we all know that the country needs substantial finances to finance its mitigation and adaptation goals. For instance, if you just look at the NDC, it says that the country needs at least 101 USD billion for mitigation only in the energy sector, and you need about 14 billion in the adaptation sector. So these are huge amount of finances that are needed. And what I think is carbon finance or carbon markets can help channel finance to some of these mitigation and adaptation goals. And I just have to here mention that it is not the silver bullet. It is not the only source of finance or the only instrument to finance the mitigation and adaptation goals, but it can be one of the instruments that can channel mitigation finance towards mitigation and adaptation goal. And most importantly, it can help to complement the tight public budgets. And what basically it does is that it enables just the state and non-state actors to finance these mitigation activities in return of obtaining transferable mitigation outcomes. But these mitigation activities can have a lot of adaptation core benefits as well as sustainable development goals, which should be a key thing that should be looked out when you want to promote high integrity carbon projects in the country. And what we see or what we've seen is that while there's a global growth in carbon markets, which has grown for the last few years, we see that this does not reflect in Pakistan. And we've looked at understanding what the different challenges. And we see that the potential of carbon market is yet to be explored in the country. And we identified a lot of gaps, but one of the challenges was the legal and policy uncertainty. For example, when we spoke to the private sector is that things are not clear to us. We don't understand where the government is heading. There's lack of clarity in a lot of issues, so we are hesitant to get into the market. And the provinces are mentioning, we'd like some coordination. We'd like to understand what our role is and what's the role of the federal government in carbon markets. So this legal and policy uncertainty was one of the gaps or one of the challenges that was hindering carbon projects from entering the market and scaling of carbon projects. And just to highlight why carbon market legal frameworks are relevant and why this is something that Pakistan should definitely consider and take into account. One of it is just, the buzzword that we all hear out there, integrity of carbon markets. The most important thing is that when you have legal frameworks in place, then you're able to set the minimum standards or the minimum requirements that projects need to comply with. And what this does is that it makes sure that the carbon projects in the country contribute real mitigation. The emission reductions are real. There's no conflating of emission reductions, there's permanence, and there's all these things. And what this happens is that you get confidence in buyers and investors who say, projects from Pakistan can now be trusted because of ABCD, and because of this, they now go for projects in Pakistan. Another key thing is just that you want to make sure that as projects are being developed in the country, these projects do not cause environmental harm, but at the same time, the people who deserve to actually benefit because they contribute to the mitigation that is happening or to the emission reductions that are actually generating carbon credits get a fair share of their contribution. And you can do this through your regulatory framework. Another thing is also that there needs to be some kind of transparency in the market. There needs to be some information flow in the country. There needs to be access to information. The government and even the public needs to know what are the projects being implemented in Pakistan, what are the emission reductions, what are the areas that are already being, projects are being implemented so that there is no overlap. And once you have this kind of flow of information, then this builds confidence in the system. And then finally, as I mentioned before, this is quite important for certainty to market participants, both project developers, buyers, but also financial institutions. And I will just speak about this in the next slides. But they need to have some legal certainty. For instance, what is the nature of carbon asset, which has already been discussed before? What are the rights associated to it? How can it be used to obtain finance? What kind of transactions can be made? So there needs to be this kind of certainty, but also certainty on the government's policy on carbon markets. And I will not go into this, but just I think one key thing right now that is there is we have Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, we have the voluntary carbon market, we have also national compliance markets that are coming up in different countries. So what the market needs to know is what is the government's policy on carbon markets or carbon projects in the country? Does the government prefer to only go one way, Article 6, or does the government also want to go both Article 6 and the VCM? Does the government have a policy where these two markets can be linked so that, for instance, voluntary carbon projects can get authorization and be transferred internationally with corresponding adjustment? So these are just some of the key things that the governments need to communicate, and this can be done clearly through the legal frameworks. And as I mentioned, access to finance for carbon projects also require this legal clarity and certainty. Because first of all, developing carbon projects require extensive finances, and this is usually limited. They don't get enough capital, or it's actually difficult, and that's why we don't see a lot of projects. And what we see is that financial institutions are quite hesitant to provide lending to carbon projects because of the type of risks that they come with. And one of it is the risks that they come with, but also just because financial institutions have not been able to, in different countries, it's just not only in Pakistan, but in a lot of countries, financial institutions haven't still understood how, what are carbon markets, how can we provide lending, how can carbon revenues be used as a security. This is one thing, but also carbon projects come with a lot of risks that financial institutions are not ready and are not willing to take up because of the type of business that they are in. So what we see is that one of the things that lack of regulatory guidance is also restricting access to finance to carbon projects. I mean, finance to carbon projects, particularly from commercial lenders, in addition to all other reasons that I mentioned before. So if you have like strong legal frameworks, or we have clear legal frameworks, this can enable access to finance for carbon projects. For instance, as it was discussed earlier by Dr. Amat, if you have, you clarify what is the legal nature of carbon assets, how can they be transacted, how can they be accounted for, what is the taxation regime to it, how can financial institutions provide lending, and can they even take it as collateral? That is one thing. And then also you clarify who has the legal ownership of carbon assets, because before a bank issues any financing, or before they issue before they lend, one of the things you usually need to prove is ownership of the asset that is being used as collateral. So if there's no clarity in ownership, if they're not even sure how we can define ownership of these carbon assets, then it's difficult to issue financing. And the last point is just that the possibility of enforcing in case of default. This is also an issue that banks are hesitant because they don't know how they're going to enforce in case there's default, because they cannot go and possess the carbon credits. And as Dr. Amat mentioned, in the international standards, there's no possibility of registering an encumbrance over the registry. So if there's, for instance, a national registry in the country, then this is able to provide information on ownership on carbon credits, and there's also the possibility of registering such an encumbrance. And then what happens is that when there's default, and then there's this security that they're able to possess and liquidate this carbon assets when they've been used as collateral. So thank you so much for your time, and looking forward to discussions further.
Thank you, Dr. Lydia. Lydia, we'd request you to share the presentation with the organizers, if that's all right with you. It's very informative. Thank you. Yeah. Welcome, Dr. Bowman. Very pleased to meet you and have you with us today. I know it's very early for all of you there on a Saturday, so we appreciate that as well. But it's going to be a great start to your day. Over to you.
Assalamu alaikum. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for the invite to speak to you today, particularly to Justice Jawad and Bolan for extending the invitation to everyone in the room for being here and for focusing on this incredibly important topic. So what I want to do in the short period of time that I have is sort of give some high-level analysis of the research findings from my work over the past few years that are relevant to this conversation, and really with a view to just laying some ground for future conversations about the Pakistan context in particular. And where I really want to focus is with work that I was doing with the United Nations Environment Programme a few years ago on a topic that we called legal readiness for climate finance. And the aim of that work was really to pinpoint the role of law and regulation in helping to not only scale climate finance, but also to help move it at scale. I just want to check you can hear me. Everything's okay with sound, yeah, and visuals.
Sorry, could I ask everybody to mute their mics? Those who are not speaking, of course.
Good, thank you. So the idea being how to use law and regulation to help de-risk, to mobilize, to leverage, and to harness finance, but particularly for the purposes of crowding in private sector finance. As Dr. Lydia mentioned, particularly when looking at the Pakistan NDC, there are multiple billions of dollars that need to be moved around. And I guess the idea is, as Mr. Khurram mentioned, it's not just about calling in finance as a way of being, an aid recipient country. It is also a way of mobilizing endogenous empowerment, a way of being able to put out investment opportunities to private sector actors in a way that still has integrity for the sovereignty of your country. So this work resulted in what I call a legal analytical framework for climate finance. And it consists of sort of two main features, really. The first being a typology of what we call financial mechanisms on the one hand and facilitative modalities on the other. And I want to walk you through what those two different things are. And then the second part of the work was, what are the legal forms that those different tools, whether it's a financial mechanism or a facilitative modality, what are the legal forms that those tools can take? So financial mechanisms really are, I think, the things that we're most familiar with. It's the kind of tools that actually have come up a lot in the discussion today around carbon credits and carbon markets. And it really involves, putting a price on something and money being generated through a tool. So, for example, carbon pricing, putting a sufficiently high price on carbon, whether that's through a trade mechanism or a tax mechanism. Another example of a financial mechanism tool would be creating a green bond. Another example would be tax incentives, something which is far less talked about, but I think the American example of the Inflation Reduction Act has shown how effective that can be for moving private sector money to where it needs to go. And of course, blended finance, such as guarantees or insurance, or even creation of a green investment bank or a climate trust fund, something that actually Kenya and Bangladesh have created as examples. Conditional lending subject to environmental terms, That's something we see in China's Green Credit Directive. And of course, eliminating fossil fuel subsidies, because the idea is that all finance is flowing in the same direction toward a low carbon and resilient economy. So that's financial mechanisms. And then the second category was facilitative or enabling modalities. And we've heard the word enabling a few times today from Dr. Rahmat and others. And the idea of the facilitative modalities really is to indirectly mobilize finance by increasing information, capacity building, behavioral change, transparency. So these include things like climate-related financial disclosure for companies and financial institutions, something that we have seen really proliferate in Europe, the UK, and Asia so far. Labeling and taxonomies. How do you know a green bond is green if you don't have some kind of common framework for an understanding of what is sustainable or not, common language? Ideas labs, which is actually more sort of collaborative endeavors, matchmaking and training schemes where you are training not only project proponents in how to create a business case, but also investors, training and educating investors in how to understand what new projects in this space look like. Investors tend to stick with what they know. So we need to be helping to educate them in terms of what this brave new world looks like and what is in fact investable and implementable. So, and of course, technical assistance programs as well. And really, what this work showed is that both types of regulatory tool are essential and they're both complementary. As I mentioned, in terms of, we often just spend most of our time talking about financial mechanisms, which is important, but those financial mechanisms cannot do their job. They cannot move money at scale to where it needs to go without the enabling environment, the facilitative modalities to go with it. As I mentioned, how do you know a green bond is green if you don't have some kind of taxonomy or classificatory tool to assist with that? And the educational piece is incredibly important. So I loved listening to what Mr. Kamran had to say about educating not just school students, but investors, educating judges, educating lawyers, educating CEOs of firms, something that we're beginning to see in other areas around the world. So those enabling instruments, the facilitative modalities, are just as important as the financial mechanisms. And really, one of the main findings of the work was that they'd never really been considered as climate finance regulation before, but they most certainly are. The good thing about them also is that they tend to be, they don't cost a lot to set up. The financial mechanisms tend to require some kind of government financial input, but the facilitative modalities are much more, informational. So, and in fact, it's in the facilitative modalities that we're beginning to see a lot of legal and regulatory movement around the world. In terms of the legal forms that these two types of tools can make, could be black letter law, your tax statute, company law statute, but we're also beginning to see them in a range of financial and market regulation tools, central bank directives to supervised firms, for example, or more and more disclosure recommendations through financial regulation rules. And of course, contractual agreements as well. Contracts are super important in this space, not just as legal documents, but also as normative setting tools and communication tools as well, especially for insurance and multi-sector collaborations. And really, I guess the importance of this work, this framework, legal analytical framework for climate finance, or legal readiness for climate finance, two things. First of all, it helps to make the invisible become visible for decision makers. In other words, it sets out a kind of a regulatory palette, or a buffet, a feast, where you can see the different dishes on the table. And there are many different dishes on the table. And when one can see the different dishes on the table, then one can make decisions that are appropriate for one's own local context about what can work to help move money. And leads to the second important thing about this framework, which is it will require moving climate finance at scale for a country will require an integrated regulatory framework. So it's not just one tool at all. And in fact, Dr. Lydia, you mentioned this, there is no one tool. There is no silver bullet in this space at all. It is a combination of complementary legal and regulatory tools, complementary financial mechanisms with facilitative modalities in an integrated framework. And what that regulatory mix, will depend really on Pakistan's local context. And especially in the context of Islamic finance that I've seen in the chat, which will be a thing very soon. So in my final few minutes, I just want to point out also that there are really sort of three things that are required. There's probably many more, but let me just point out three things that are required when working with this framework of financial mechanisms, facilitative modalities, and integration between them for the most robust framework that can help call in as well as put out climate finance opportunities. And those three things are this. First of all, mapping is required. Mapping of the current legal and regulatory architecture in the country. And that mapping, the idea behind it is really to do a triage, an evaluation of what law and regulation is in existence at the moment. Where are the gaps? Where are the barriers and the blockages to the finance flowing where it needs to? Where are the strengths? What is working? Where are the vulnerabilities? And what is needed going forward? So that's a legal and regulatory mapping exercise, and they are not cheap necessarily. They are a big exercise. So how then can a country work with multilateral development finance opportunities to get the money to be able to do that mapping and to implement the findings from that mapping? The second thing that's required, and this is just beginning to become a thing now, is national level transition planning. And I recently did a big project on this with some amazing people from the private sector and the World Bank and academia on the notion of countries. We have had task forces already on corporate transition plans. We need to move into a level of national transition plans. And certainly when we begin to see litigation happening around the world, for example, the Swiss senior citizens case, where a number of senior female members of society essentially took the Swiss government to the European Human Rights Court for not moving fast enough on greenhouse gas emissions reductions within the country of Switzerland. And the European Human Rights Court agreed with those citizens. Essentially, when you read that judgment, it is a judgment about national level transition planning. And in fact, the court goes so far as to set out 5 key ingredients of what a national transition plan looks like. And the idea behind that is that each country needs to have some kind of vision, some kind of blueprint, some kind of plan and planning in place alongside the NDC process, or as part of the NDC process, for a whole of society, whole of economy approach to the net zero transition. And the final point that I want to make that is required from this work is heightened levels of collaboration and coordination. And that is at all levels, but whether it's international, whether it's within the country, but particularly for intra-governmental coordination. So governmental agencies and legal entities speaking to each other and coordinating to make sure that everyone is on the same page and, again, heading in the same direction toward low carbon and climate resilient sustainable economy. And certainly that coordination and collaboration also extends, of course, to external stakeholders, particularly in the private sector and also civil society. So these are the insights that I just wanted to share with you today. But the idea is really just that this is an entree, a sort of a preliminary meal before much deeper, longer conversations about how this might apply particularly to Pakistan. So thank you so much again for the invitation to speak.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bowman. Professor Mary Claire Seeger, so happy to have you here. You've written more than 25 books and hundreds of articles on the subject, and we're all ears. Over to you, Professor.
Assalamu alaikum from the stone spires and misty marshes of Cambridge. I'd like to first thank our hosts for this kind invitation, and also, of course, all of the fascinating speakers that I've heard from today, including in my area of global education, Mr. Cameron from the IBA CE. It is always a pleasure also to follow Professor Megan Bowman from the King's College Centre for Climate Law and Governance, who is a leading voice in these debates and has been a deeply respected speaker in our events and indeed chapters of some of my books as well. Her award-winning work on climate finance, her ideas on national transition planning. It's always a pleasure to hear. I would like to especially thank the justices, the Honorable Jawad Hassan, and of course the Honorable Syed Mansour Ali Shah, for their kind collaboration and cooperation over the years in the context of the COP. I think my piece here is on global education and especially legal research collaboration on climate law and governance and climate law and governance dialogue and partnership. Because as you know, the work of the universities is not just legal research, it's also dialogue and building communities of practice and career directions for our graduates, as well as the teaching and capacity building that goes with that. So I will focus briefly on that, basically just opening a few doors and windows for our colleagues in the spirit of collaboration, and perhaps also an invitation to the law. As my mentor, His Excellency Justice Christopher Gregory Mountry used to say. So in terms of books and articles and the research, I would want to especially highlight Climate Courage, Contributions and Compliance, which is a new Routledge handbook on climate law and governance that has been 9 years in the making and will be launched next week, with incredibly important contributions on climate finance. I would first, of course, recognize Professor Megan Bowman's contribution that looks at climate finance and the options open, which she has spoken about, but also the contributions from Multilateral Development Bank General Councils and the Green Climate Fund, as well as articles on the climate risk disclosure processes, examining the insurance industry and the finance that can be provided there, and of course, questioning and unpacking the impacts of the CBAM. it may be a useful resource for our colleagues, including those in the room with an academic interest in this area. I certainly hope so, after so many people from around the world have collaborated in editing this book that Professor Christina Voigt and I have worked on together with advocate Zunaida Musawatiwala. And I should set the same by also saying that the book and the articles and the work that is being done finally by academics who I think are late to this game. Speaking as someone who was, as a university student, a delegate to the 1992 Rio Earth Summit and participated in a very tiny and humble way in the negotiations of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And then, of course, as a senior legal advisor to the Secretariat and the presidency of the COPs in the negotiations and rapid entry into force of the Paris Agreement in 2021 as well. I think the key for me has been to see whether we can build a community of dialogue, a community of practice in this area. And I think that there is a great deal of work to still do in that way. But in terms of global collaboration and global dialogue and community of practice building, the contributions that can be made and are being made by the Climate Law and Governance Initiative deserve a special mention here, not least because Justice Jawad and Justice Syed, among others, have collaborated so brilliantly in this initiative over the years on behalf of Pakistan. The initiative, of course, is formed alongside the COP, and it's formed especially by the hosts of global online and in-person symposia that have been held since the COP11 in Montreal in 2005, when McGill hosted the first one. And it's a collaboration not just of university law faculties from as wide-ranging a group as the ADA law faculty in Baku, the University of Dubai in Dubai, McGill, Yale, University of Cambridge here, University of Nairobi, and many others. It's also a coalition of the International Bar Association, the International Law Association, the International Development Law Organization, the IUCN's World Commission on Environmental Law, the legal offices of the UN Environment Programme, UN Development Programme, World Bank, and others, together with the General Counsel's offices of the Multilateral Development Bank, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, the Green Climate Fund. You're starting to see a picture here, aren't you, of those who wish to collaborate and need to collaborate on climate law and governance, because this is what now the world is demanding. This is what now the highly climate vulnerable developing countries, as our colleague said earlier this morning, very early for me, are demanding. And it is together with the Global Judicial Institute on the Environment, which Justice Jawad Hassan and others are engaged with. And I think as a network, this Climate Law and Governance Initiative does seek to build a bit that community of practice that is needed worldwide, the peer review and the peer engagement that is needed worldwide with an ever-growing cohort, not just through the flagship event, the Climate Law and Governance Day Symposium, which this year will be taking place online on November 15th for the whole day. And I would love to extend an invitation to all of you, but also through a growing network that is being built among all of these institutions and more worldwide. In Glasgow in COP21, a pledge was made. We had carefully counted the numbers of qualified climate law and governance specialists worldwide, and optimistically, we were less than 600. The pledge was to, before COP this year, COP29, put in place and expand and scale up that network to over 6,000. So a tenfold increase of 600 to 6,000. And that is now in progress. We have over 5,000 law and governance specialists registered in the Climate Law Capacity Registry, and we are working as hard as we can to identify more who will be able to be qualified and selected for the registry before the COP in 15 days. It is a very tough road, but we hope we're going to make it. And I should also highlight that not only is there an annual symposium, which all can join online or in person alongside the COP, which brings together the architects of the Paris Agreement, the lawyers who are implementing it and aligning their activities from the private sector, from the judiciary, from governments, from others, but also there are global leadership awards presented for the entire sector, Climate Law and Governance Global Leadership Awards, for judges, for practitioners, for negotiators, for academics, and others who are leading in this area. And these are presented every 2 years, so the nominations are currently open. I would just like to add to that, to the invitation that is piling up in front of you from the education side. Now, finally, what we have noticed in the studies that we have done on the pedagogical needs in this area, and here I am especially interested in partnering with those of you around the table who are mentioning the need for capacity strengthening and capacity building. Many of you have done so, and it has been a pleasure over the years to work, especially with Professor Megan Bowman. But I would love to also reach out to Mr. Kamran from IBACEE and others who have mentioned this. We have looked a little bit at the civil service schools around the world, seeking training that is offered in executive education for public service, senior employees on climate law and governance. We have also sought that training in the judicial education institutes. We've looked for committees in bar associations that deal with climate law and governance. We've looked for law faculties, particularly in highly climate vulnerable developing countries, that have courses on offer in climate law and governance. We are finding very little. And if we think about the nationally determined contributions alone that have been registered with the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, with a new round due next year, we have been seeing 169 out of 186 calling for and laying as a precondition the need for law and governance reform in order to be able to advance the NDC. That is a chasm the size of a deep sea trench between the lawyers who exist who are qualified to be able to actually lead this process in the legal reform element in their country at the national and local level, and what we have currently in place. And our civil service schools, less than 5 with courses to teach. Our judicial education institutes, only a few, Pakistan being one of the leaders perhaps. Our bar associations, a handful with committees, though they are growing. And our law faculty, sadly, only 3 or 4 LLMs in climate law around the world, 3 of which are new and were founded during the COP at Climate Law and Governance Day. And so I think meeting that need, we all need to step up and scale up. The Astronomer Royal, Professor Martin Rees, told us here in Cambridge that it was a disgrace that we were punching below our weight a few years ago on climate education. And he was right. He was right. His work with the Center for the Study of Existential Risk was starting to lay the groundwork for the kind of cooperation that is needed, but far from enough. And so one of the things that I would like to conclude with as an invitation from the global education perspective is that we have been able to develop online courses here in the University of Cambridge, together with many colleagues from universities around the world that are involved in the Climate Law and Governance Initiative. And these courses are available not just on climate finance and climate law and governance, but also on all of the sustainable development goals as we build them. They're 3 weeks long. They're offered with bursaries to key highly climate vulnerable countries. And in particular, I think around 8,000 law and policy leaders, current and future, have taken the courses from 172 countries in the first 2 years, with a 22,000 list of expressions of interest. There is an advanced course of 8 weeks that follows on the initial courses for which bursaries are available. And there is a master's online that we're working to develop together with colleagues from different universities who are doing the same. Alongside the online courses that we can invite and offer Pakistan to consider partnering on, there is the engagement that is possible of the cohort of legal specialists who have been trained and joined the registry. And the engagement is particularly, hopefully, relevant through the Climate Law and Governance Day. So I will conclude with an invitation on the 15th of November, and there are free options available for any low income or anyone who feels, students or others who feel that they cannot afford a registration fee. There is the Climate Law and Governance Initiative flagship event, the Climate Law and Governance Online Symposium, and it is open for registration. There is also on the 17th of November in the COP in Baku with ADA law faculty, a one-day legal specialization course, which is offered with the architects of the Paris Agreement, with the professors who designed the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. The one-day course, which also brings the certificate, is hybrid and can be joined online. And what we would love to explore with our colleagues from Pakistan, as we have with other highly climate vulnerable countries in the forum, is the possibility of extending 150 bursaries for government officials, for your best and brightest law students and researchers in your top law faculties, and for any judges and professionals who are interested to take the online courses with no cost and be able to join this cohort of global capacity that is being desperately put in place and is badly needed. So I will conclude with that invitation, asking my colleague, Dr. Antoinette Nestor, who has also been here since about 4:45 a.m. online with me, and to be able to put the links to these invitations in the meeting chat and convey them to anyone who might be interested here. More broadly, I think it is crucial that all of us as educators step up and scale up and move forward together in this area, because as we know, climate change is a global phenomenon. It will affect all of us, and it is already affecting all of us. If we can't learn to work together, if we can't move in a different direction, if we can't mobilize the finance that has been promised for a more sustainable future, we will have let down everyone who depends on us, especially those generations to come, especially those future law and policy leaders to whom we owe the most incredible responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to speed up the session forward because we started a bit late. I'll invite Additional Secretary, Ministry of Climate Change, Dr. Zulfikar Yunus Saab. He's also the head of the Climate Finance Unit at the federal government level. Sir, welcome.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
We can hear you. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most beneficent, Honorable Justice Mansoor Ali Shah Sahab, Justice Jawad Hassan, Abid Suleri Sahab, management of NIBAF, organizers and sponsors of this very important Climate Finance Forum, experts who have spoken before me, ladies and gentlemen. Today, as we stand at a critical juncture in the fight against climate change, the importance of building a robust governance system for climate finance cannot be overstated. Pakistan, like many other nations, faces an urgent need to address the impacts of climate change that are increasingly visible in our lives, communities, and economies. However, tackling these challenges effectively requires more than just commitment and ambition. It requires building an efficient governance framework that can manage climate finance responsibly and transparently, ensuring that every rupee or dollar achieves maximum impact. Climate finance definition has already been discussed by Abid Suleri Saab in detail in the earlier, in his speech, so I don't go into details. However, I feel that climate finance, to be truly effective, we need to have an efficient governance framework built on three key principles: transparency, accountability, and inclusivity. By transparency, we mean that the climate finance must be managed in a way that is transparent at every level. This means establishing systems that allow us to track how funds are collected, allocated, and utilized. Clear reporting mechanisms and regular audits are crucial to ensuring that all stakeholders, including the public government agencies and international partners, have a clear understanding of how funds are being deployed. Transparency not only builds trust, but also minimize the risk of misappropriation or misallocation, ensuring that the funds reach the communities and the projects that need them the most. And from accountability, it means that just as we accountable to our citizens, we must also be accountable to the global community that supports our climate finance efforts. This calls for a robust monitoring and evaluation framework that regularly assesses the impact of the funded projects. By holding ourselves accountable and openly sharing both success and setbacks, we can continuously improve our approach to the climate finance. And lastly, the inclusivity means that the climate change, which affects everyone, but it is the most vulnerable communities, often marginalized and underrepresented, that suffers its impact the hardest. Therefore, our climate finance governance framework must be inclusive, ensuring that the voices from all sectors of the society, particularly women, youth, and indigenous communities, are heard and considered properly. By including diverse perspective, we can develop, sponsor, and address needs of all the stakeholders and ensuring that the resources are directed where they are most needed. Now, this is the framework on which we are trying to build our climate finance governance in Government of Pakistan and the Ministry of Climate Change. And over the past few years, we have taken some very important initiatives, some of which have been completed, the others are in the process. Like, we have almost finalized our National Climate Finance Strategy with the help of World Bank. This helps us to very systematically access the climate finance, and also it provides a mechanism to ensure its transparency, the climate finance which we access, and its effective implementation. Because as they say that the devil is in the detail. So if you don't have a very robust implementation strategy, you cannot access the climate finance in more effective way. So at the COP29, we are also launching our climate finance strategy. Second important policy that we have now almost finalized, in the sense that provinces has agreed with the policy. Prime Minister, being in charge of Pakistan Climate Change Council, has also given his consent to the policies, our carbon market policy. So it will open up a huge, carbon pricing, as we have discussed earlier in the session. So that is coming to be another important initiative that we are now unveiling at the COP29. And with that, we have also prepared some of the very important projects in the carbon market, so that, to start the ball rolling. And hopefully at the COP29 at our pavilion, Pakistan Pavilion, we have almost, planned more than 30 events which reflect our climate priorities. So this would be one of our priorities that we'll be presenting. And when we talk about, as I just mentioned about in the principles for climate finance governance, to ensure transparency, we have now, upgraded our climate finance investment tracker to a climate finance portal. And now we are trying to, make this ingrained in our system, this portal, which will be accessible to our development partners and also to all the beneficiaries of these climate financing. So this climate finance portal will help us tracking and reporting climate-related financial flows, and it will reinforce transparency. This portal will also, be help us in actually we are talking to our system developer to link it with the artificial intelligence and algorithms so that automatically once we feed our national adaptation plan and the requirements, so the incoming flows can be matched through artificial intelligence where the needs are the most. And finally, we have also established Climate Change Authority, which is now working. The chairperson and the members are also in place. And we want to make this one of the most effective authority for the climate governance system. And somebody spoke about Carbon Market Authority or Carbon Market organization. So maybe this authority can help develop that particular framework for the carbon markets. We are also actively collaborating with international development partners. I'm very thankful to World Bank. They have helped us with the climate finance strategy. Asian Development Bank, they have helped us with the this portal that we are now building, and IMF and UNDP are helping us in many other areas. The partnership not only brings much needed financial support, but also technical expertise, allowing us to build the capacities and develop best practices in climate finance governance. As we have achieved so much, but the challenges have remained because the challenges are huge, and the difficult part is that these are not going to be easier for us, but in the coming days it will be even difficult. The situation will be going to be difficult. So the earlier we are ready, the better it would be for us. So Pakistan, because of these challenges, Pakistan still requires more substantial investments in capacity building and institutional strengthening to ensure that our governance systems are resilient enough to manage increasingly complex finance flow. Additionally, the integration of climate considerations into all levels of public finance management is essential for achieving long-term sustainability. I'm happy to report that Ministry of Finance has this year prepared the annual budget by tagging the green investments of the Government of Pakistan, which is a very welcome step because we have always hearing from the development partners about what green investment Government of Pakistan is having for the climate redressal. So I'm very happy to share that the green investment for the Government of Pakistan for this year budget are more than $1 billion, which is huge for a developing country like Pakistan and shows the seriousness of the Government of Pakistan in addressing the climate challenges. So ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I would say that building robust governance for climate finance is an imperative for Pakistan. By committing to transparency, accountability, and inclusivity, we can ensure that our climate finance is managed effectively, that it reaches those who need it most, and that it supports the resilience and sustainable future for Pakistan. Together with a strong governance framework, we can turn the tide into our favor, and we can, chart out Pakistan's path to climate resilience. So thank you very much for being patient to listen to me. Pakistan, Paindabad. Thank you.
Thank you. Saeed Irfan Ali Saab, Executive Director of State Bank. Sir, please. And then we will invite Justice Mansoor Ali Shah Saab to give his keynote speech.
Thank you so much, Bulland Saab. Thank you, Shah Saab. And I thank all the participants to be here. I recall, मुझे याद है कुछ साल पहले I participated in एक मुशायरा हुआ था लाहौर में, खाना फरंग में. So there was a poet called, उनका नाम था कैसर बारवी. काफी देर बाद जब उनकी बारी आई तो उन्होंने हटने से इनकार कर दिया. And he refused and he had to be taken off. तो तकरीबन 3.25 घंटे बाद I'm getting a chance to speak और मुझे organizers ने कहा है कि जी आप 5 मिनट ले लें तो मैं 5 मिनट ले लेता हूँ but everybody has left जिन्होंने मुझे सुनना था. So very quickly, sir, I'll take 5 minutes, and I think I should be talking about the State Bank's position here, but just very short stories, 2 stories, and an experience and a resolve. Stories are yeah, कि I used to work in a bank branch when I started my career, and there used to अब हर 3-4 दिन बाद एक खातून आया करती थी मांगने. तो we used to tell her कि जब उसने आना तो पंजाबी में उसने मांगना, हमने कहना जी बीबी अम्मा अल्लाह भला करेगा. अम्मा ने जवाब देना कि अल्लाह ते भला करेगा तुसी ना करना. The issue primarily is that Allah will definitely help us out, of course. But what are we supposed to do? हमने क्या करना as organizers, as a country? And two, I was representing State Bank of Pakistan in the G20 summit. Pakistan is not part of the G20, but we were invited by the Indonesian government. 2022 की बात है. There was the Indonesian Prime Minister आई हुई थी, an ex-New Zealand की Prime Minister थी. I believe her name was Helen Clark. She was an elderly woman and she was working on environment for different government bodies. So I got a chance to speak to her, and I told her that there have been floods in the year 2022, and there's a precarious position and Pakistan would be needing a lot of support. Her first question was that, okay, fine, but what are you doing about it? What are the steps your government taken on this catastrophe? So again, the charity begins at home. It's us. हमने क्या करना है? हमारा क्या काम है? And then, like one of the speakers said, KG, there is no silver bullet. It is everybody's job, and we have to address it collectively. A few years back, I headed the FATF committee from State Bank of Pakistan. As all of you know, that State Bank, Government of Pakistan had been placed on the grey list. Pretty well-known fact, but important बात उसमें क्या थी? How was that? How did we get out of the grey list? Because everyone participated. We had to come up with new laws. We had to come up with regulations. We had to educate the society. And sir, most importantly, जो बार-बार हमें FATF कहता रहा कि are you punishing the people responsible for money laundering and terrorist financing? Are we doing that? वो बार-बार पूछता. Here also we'll have to ask, do we have a national risk assessment? Are we coordinating collectively? And do we have the necessary laws and regulations? And at the end of the day, will we be punishing the polluters? Will we be doing that? If we are able to do that, I think we will achieve our objectives. Acha, State Bank क्या कर रहा है? What are we doing here? अच्छा, एक तो सबसे पहली बात है जो World Bank ने कहा, I think they're right. The World Bank said that between the year 2023-30, Pakistan will need approximately $348 billion. अब आप लोग सोच रहे होंगे कि यार $348 billion, IMF से तो अभी आपको $7 billion मिले, so you are under an IMF program. So what are we really talking about? 2030 तक, we are already in the year 2024. So how are we going to get $348 billion so as to we stop, we address the climate change that is happening around us? तो ये तो एक State Bank, Ministry of Finance तो ये ऐसा कर नहीं पाएगा. It will have to be a collective effort that will have to be undertaken by each one of us. Then Central Bank obviously अहम role है, and State Bank is mobilizing and channeling resources, and we are coming up with policies that will help climate financing. Just as one of the financing that you were asking question कि जी climate financing हो रही है sir. ये जो आपको solar financing नजर आ रही है, आपके चारों तरफ जो आपको solar panels नजर आ रहे हैं, bulk of it is being financed by the commercial banks, is subsidized financing है. And till 30th September, the amount that is outstanding is 97 billion rupees. So a substantial sum is going on. But like my friend from IBA said, electric motorcycles that is being done, that has now started to happen. Government को subsidized scheme भी दे रही है इसके. Solar tubes हैं, so government is coming up with. But like I said, ये सारा काम गवर्नमेंट ने नहीं करना है. It has to be done by each one of us wherever we are sitting, and State Bank is part of that, and we are encouraging banks to come up with policies that will enable climate financing. The State Bank of Pakistan has proactively advanced sustainable finance by embedding climate risk management and governance into the financial sector. हमने green banking guidelines issue की थी 2017 में to create awareness in the banking sector about environmental risk. Then again we came up with environmental and social risk management implementation manual in 2022. And you'll be happy to know that State Bank is now currently working on green finance taxonomy, that is developing a national green finance taxonomy that will classify investment based on climate mitigation and adaptation criteria along with international standards. The taxonomy will promote transparency, accountability, and alignment with climate goals, ensuring strong governance. Acha, now, Pak Sir Zameen Shad Baat is हमारा national anthem start इससे होता है, sir. So we have to ensure Pak Sir Zameen Shad. The institutions must come up with a resolution plan of their own, isn't it? SBP का vision क्या कहता है? On environment of 2028, हम लोग क्या कह रहे हैं? And then the way we are looking at it. हम कह ये रहे हैं कि we believe in conservation of energy and resources. So we have to do that. We believe in minimizing carbon emissions. I think one of the learning is that carbon emissions and carbon credits. So we need to, find ways. आजकल, most of you would know that digitization is going on at a very brisk pace. So digital assets are important. So carbon assets are equally important. I think that is a learning point. I think that is one thing that I'll take back to State Bank of Pakistan. Sir, we will keep our workplace neat and clean. Pretty simple सी बात है sir. It's nothing too difficult about it. साफ रखें हम अपने इदारे को, नहीं साफ रखेंगे तो probably will be contributing positively to the environment. Then we aim to become a paperless organization. By the way, let me share with you that State Bank of Pakistan, no files move. There are no files. The files are moved through an electronic system, through our laptops, through the local area network that we operate in. So अगर मुझे और बात करनी है मेरे MD नवाब रियाज चुनारा साहब को, तो we don't need to. मुझे कोई फाइल नहीं इनको भेज. I don't send any files to him. I send a note through the computer, not an email, but a knowledge-based system. The State Bank has already done that. It is currently happening. Well, when we correspond with the rest of the financial industry or with all banks are doing that. हमसे किसी बैंक ने बात करनी हो तो it has to be paperless. There are no paper movement between institutions. Then we encourage initiatives to improve the work environment, and then we will promote environment-friendly policies. So this is the resolve of the central bank. And like I said, like I promised, 5 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So that was wonderful. I now invite our chief guest, Justice Syed Mansoor Ali Shah. Shah Saab will give his keynote address, and then Justice Jawad Hassan will give a concluding note. Shah Saab, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. Let me first thank Justice Mushir Alam, my senior and my mentor in many ways, that he sits in the audience and I'm sort of making this speech in front of him. Thank you, sir. Thank you for being here. Thank you all. I think what Dr. Abid Suleri said this morning, he said that we've sacrificed our Saturday being here. I think sacrificing the Saturday was very, worth it. And I've learned tremendous amount of things. We don't hear much about climate finance at the Supreme Court. And this intersection or this energetic exercise has been absolutely wonderful. And I hope that we can take this dialogue and this exercise into our Federal Judicial Academy also, so more of our judges understand. Let me also tell you that we're passing through a season of sacrifices at the Supreme Court also, but these sacrifices, I tell you, will make this country stronger tomorrow, for sure. an interesting comment. I mean, I know that our phones are bugged in this country, but never thought that PowerPoint presentations are also bugged now. Moving on, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to share with you how the justice sector or the judiciary is looking at climate finance, you see. And we call it, what you call climate finance, I would call it climate finance justice. And that's our area now, and that's how we look at this entire scope. So climate finance has not only become one of the most pressing issues of our time, but also one that demands an urgent attention and creative solutions. You already know that Supreme Court, as well as the judiciary, I mean, the High Court itself, has come up with some exciting jurisprudence on climate justice, and that has had global recognition. But somehow climate finance is an area we haven't really dabbled in. And I think today's exercise and my sitting in through this this conversation that took place has been hugely beneficial for me personally. And I think that will get translated in jurisprudence eventually. So in an era where climate change presents unparalleled challenges to humanity, it is essential to understand how financial support dedicated to climate action can foster resilience, especially for countries whose primary approach is adaptation. So we all understand that the primary goal of climate finance is to facilitate the transition to a low carbon and climate resilient global economy. It encompasses funding for both mitigation, which involves reducing or preventing greenhouse gas emissions, and adaptation, which involves building resilience to the impacts of climate change, and that applies to us. For a country like Pakistan, with primary focus on adaptation, climate finance becomes a lifeline to strengthen areas like infrastructure, agriculture, water management, health sector, displacement, migration, economic inequality, disaster resilience, and the list goes on. For Pakistan, climate finance is not a choice, but a survival strategy, and we need to understand that. In a sense, when climate activist Greta Thunberg said that our house is on fire, I think climate finance is that water that we need to put that fire out with. So the importance of climate change, climate finance to adaptation in particular is for nations like us with limited capacity to mitigate emissions, but a pressing need to adapt to rising sea levels, extreme weather, and shifting agricultural patterns. We need to understand that climate finance mechanism is actually our lifeline. These funds help secure communities, preserve ecosystems, and protect livelihoods. However, for climate finance to be truly effective, it must be mobilized on an unprecedented scale and be accessible in a timely manner to those who need it the most. That would be the objective. It also requires dedicated judicial attention to ensure the funds reach their intended goals and protect the rights of communities involved. Climate finance in countries that urgently require adaptation to climate change is fundamentally a human rights issue. And I think climate finance in Pakistan is perhaps the topmost human rights issue. Climate change is our greatest existential threat that Pakistan is passing through. And I am quite sure that's how we're looking at the Supreme Court. We look at it as a human rights issue, and that's the lens we're going to look at this issue, whatever matter comes before us. Surprisingly, nothing has come before us relating to climate finance as yet, but I'll just explain some of the public interest matters that are with us currently. So in regions vulnerable to climate impacts where rising temperatures, sea level increases, and extreme weather events threaten basic rights like access to food, water, health, and shelter, adequate financing for adaptation is essential to preserving human dignity and human survival. So that is how important climate finance is. I mean, while I heard people talk about climate finance and how do we go structuring climate finance, in our world of justice, we look at it as a serious human rights issue, an issue that affects my fundamental rights to dignity, which is an unnegotiable fundamental right under our Constitution. By framing adaptation finance as a human rights imperative, Courts can ensure that governments and international actors uphold their responsibilities to provide vulnerable populations with the resource needed for resilience, ensuring justice and equality in the global response to climate change. Loss and damage is another dimension to my mind, and I'm sure that's how the understanding is to climate finance. We look at climate finance as an immediate interjection or injection into adaptive measures, but loss and damage and attending to loss and damage would also entail climate finance, even though loss and damage is an irreversible event where things have happened, while adaptation that we're attending to is something that currently goes on. So loss and damage also is part and parcel of this issue. Let me just tell you that the judiciary would operate in a regulatory framework. We have the Constitution, we have the fundamental rights, and we need to have a regulatory framework in which we operate. So in this case, as we see that the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, along with the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement, establish that nations with greater financial capacity and historical contributions to climate change have a duty to provide financial assistance to countries that are less endowed and more vulnerable to climate impacts. This is the global framework from where we draw our right to this money that must come to Pakistan and this finance that must come to Pakistan. This framework is not merely an expression of international goodwill. It reflects a foundation of human rights obligation. And that is how we need to articulate it here or in any international forum, that this is a human rights obligation. Climate finance is essential to enable developing nations to protect their people from the devastating consequences of climate change, safeguarding rights to life, health, food, water, and shelter. And we must not forget our floods in the year 2022 and the 30 billion bill that is outstanding, and the world is looking at us and we're looking at the world, and there we are. And unless we agitate this matter as a human rights issue, there is no way we're going to get past this funding issue internationally. By viewing this commitment through a human rights lens, courts can reinforce the idea that climate finance is not optional, but a binding duty of justice, equity, and accountability. Courts, as protectors of rights, can hold states to these commitments, ensuring that financial support flows to those who need it most, translating international agreements into enforceable rights for communities facing gravest climate threats. This is a lot of material for future public interest litigation. This is also a lot of material for your arguments out there when you go out to COP or wherever. Let me also come to our domestic legal framework, and you'll be surprised and perhaps saddened also. We have Pakistan Climate Change Act 2017, and it talks about Climate Change Authority, which is the apex body which will run this show in the country. The entire climate change debate is centered around the Climate Change Authority. Then it also provides for Section 8 of the law provides that the functions of the Climate Change Authority would be to prepare suitable adaptation mitigation projects for submissions to international and local institutions for funding, including Clean Development Mechanism, Global Fund, Environmental Facility, Green Climate Fund, and Adaptation Fund. But sadly, there is no authority in the country. 2017 is the law, and we are in 2024. There is no authority. A public interest petition comes to the Supreme Court with this prayer. And we asked them, what have you done so far? And they had no answer. While our legislature is really working overnight, as you know, they haven't really come up with anything on this front. So the idea was, we said, what have you done? I mean, you produce notifications and you come up with all sorts of things overnight. How come we have not come up with authority? So they went back and they said, we're coming up with authority. They did come up with a notification for the court, but that wasn't sufficient. The case is now fixed in November later on, and we'll see. So there is no authority to start with. What to talk about anything else? We also asked them that under the law, there is a Pakistan Climate Change Fund established in 2017, says the law. There isn't anything. There is no authority what to talk about the Climate Change Fund. So the court has now directed them to please respond to what you have done. The court also asked in the hearing last time that in the recent budget that you've announced, in the recent budget, have you earmarked any money for climate and there was no response to that. I fail to understand as a judge also that what would be more important, an area for allocation in the budget, if you do not allocate anything for climate change in this country, which is severely hit by climate change. So that was shocking. And well, the government assured us that in future we will be having budgets and all that. So what I wanted to tell you is a reality check. The 2017 Act is there, no authority yet, no Climate Change Fund Act, not a single penny coming into the Climate Change Fund budget in the recent budget. So the government needs to wake up to more serious issues rather than other issues that they're attending to. So moving on. So the critical question before us is whether the existing regulatory framework adequately incentivizes climate finance. And I've been hearing this, the other speakers also. I think there is no regulatory framework. So we can't operate in a vacuum. I can't just take fundamental rights and start moving in on things. There has to be a proper regulatory framework, and our legislature, slightly overexcited legislature, needs to now do something about this also. And they need to come up with regulatory framework to deal with this. Unfortunately, in our country, climate finance lacks a robust and targeted regulatory framework. This gap poses risks to a timely project implementation and limits the confidence of investors in the security of climate-related investments. So now coming to the fact that, well, much depends on the legislature and the executive to come up with that regulatory framework, and they need to understand that this is a human rights issue, and they need to urgently come up with a regulatory framework. What we can do in the judiciary, if everything is put in place, we understand, and judiciary may be prepared in advance for it already. So judiciary's role in this arena can be transformative by providing a system that resolves climate finance disputes swiftly and fairly. That's what we can do. If there is going to be finance, if there's going to be climate finance coming into Pakistan, there will be disputes. So Pakistan's judiciary is saying, we're ready to provide you with a wonderful, robust dispute settlement system. And I'll just share that with you. To this end, we must consider creating specialized climate finance dispute mechanisms. So we're ready. There is no regulatory framework to do this. So number one, how about, and that goes very well with the IBA and the work they've done already, is the climate alternative dispute resolution. Why can't we have a climate ADR system and mediation system which could deal with all these climate issues? These methods offer a more informal approach and can be invaluable in resolving conflicts quickly and cost effectively, especially in multi-stakeholder projects. We need to move on to climate arbitration. Dedicated arbitration frameworks tailored to climate finance disputes can provide flexibility, efficiency in cases where the stakes are high and the time is of the essence. Then we can also come up with commercial courts or climate courts, you see. And we've talked about this elsewhere also, that commercial courts is something that the world has. I mean, majority of the jurisdictions, their topmost priority is having a commercial court. They think if you can't deal with the economy first as a top priority, there is nothing else that you can deal with. So if you have commercial courts, the best place to house climate debate or climate issues is within the commercial courts, because it's the businesses that get affected more than anything else through climate change. So we need to really seriously consider coming up with our commercial courts with a space within the commercial courts for climate issues. These issues will come. Actually, things are not being marketed properly. As Irfan Ali Saab said, there is billions of rupees of climate finance gone into solar issues. I'm sure there are disputes related to that also. Now, where are they going? They're just going to regular banking stream. We need to bring them into these commercial courts, get them sorted, move on, so that there's a quick and expeditious way of dealing with climate finance, so that we open ways and pathways for others to come in. So that is something we can do. The other idea, which is very important, and this has been bugging me for a long time, and I just want to place it on the record, is that it is high time that we think of an international climate court. We can't do it without that. I can't get $30 billion from the world just sitting here in my Supreme Court. I can't. I have no jurisdiction to tell any other country to, dish out money for us. So the ICJ model needs to now be replicated and taken on to the International Climate Court concept. So looking beyond national borders, we must ask ourselves whether an international climate court could play a role in safeguarding global climate finance. I'm sure this is the need of the developing countries, countries who are suffering. The world that is creating this problem will not be really interested in having this court. So this push has to come from us. Global finance, particularly when it comes to issues of loss and damage in particular. Climate impacts are borderless, and funding to address them should reflect the responsibility and capacity of all nations in line with the principles outlined by UNFCCC and Paris Agreement. Such a court, potentially modeled after the International Court of Justice, could address cases of non-compliance with international climate finance commitments, providing a venue for nations and vulnerable communities to seek redress and ensuring that commitments under global frameworks are honored. And I quote an activist from India, Vandana Shiva, who said that the earth is not a commodity to be exploited. The earth is not a commodity to be exploited. It is a community to which we all belong. So it is that sense that has to prevail, and we need to move forward in that. So some of the closing thoughts are, in conclusion, that climate finance is not merely a question of economic policy, but a matter of survival and justice. That's how serious it is. The judiciary, both nationally and internationally, has an unprecedented role in ensuring these funds are managed, protected, and implemented to meet the urgent needs of vulnerable nations and communities. By establishing climate ADR, arbitration, and specialized courts, and by supporting the creation of International Climate Court, we can forge a path towards a more just and resilient world grounded in the principles of fairness and accountability. So let us work together, hopefully this entire team here, to create a future where climate finance not only meets the demands of adaptation, but also upholds the fundamental rights of those affected by climate change. The judiciary, through its protection and facilitation of climate finance, can indeed be an ally. I knew they had to do it. So the last line, the judiciary, through its protection and facilitation of climate finance, can indeed be an ally to both people and the planet in this crucial endeavor. Thank you very much.
अगर आप vote of thanks कर दें.
Thank you, Buland. Thank you very much, Justice Saab, for such a nice keynote speech. So the 2 days event is now ending. And the objective of this is to create all the stakeholders concerning climate finance areas to get together and work towards that. And for this ecosystem, I hope that we will continue in such sessions in the future as well. So first of all, I'd like to thank Justice Saab for being the chief guest here. I'd like to thank Syed Irfan Saab coming from State Bank and all the distinguished speakers as well as the guests. Now the key person and Justice Jawad for such a nice opening remarks. I think that was a wonderful speech of yours, which we listened on 31st. So I think coming back to the management, I think Buland has been playing the key role in getting all the stakeholders. Sajid of NBAF was there for coordinating with the commercial banking side. With the support of Khurram. Khurram has been there pioneering everything, and Adnan of HBL worked a lot in this forum. Besides, obviously, these arrangements have been made by various at IBA on 31st and today at NBAF. I'm sure there's a lot of people behind who have been working for this, making this event success. I'd like to thank everyone for participating, and all the best, and thank you very much. What I'll request you is there is a lunch. The lunch is down or it's here? Okay, the lunch is at cafeteria. So it's just the other block. This is actually an academic block. We'll be going to the residential block. Somebody will guide you for the lunch. Thank you very much. Thank you.